This is the Dive Into Discovery podcast, where curiosity meets insight, and every conversation uncovers a new layer of understanding.
All right, so buckle up, because this time we are going to the moon.
To the moon.
Well, kinda.
Sort of.
Okay, not really.
Right.
But we are diving deep into some out-of-this-world theories you sent us.
That's right. Those moon landing conspiracy theories?
The ones that say that whole Apollo 11 thing back in '69
Yeah, 1969.
was all a big fake.
Staged right here on Earth.
You know, it's pretty wild how much attention this whole thing still gets.
Really is.
I mean, there's so much to talk about with this
a
one.
lot to unpack.
We've got the flag waving around when there's supposedly no air,
Right?
no stars in the pictures.
Where are all the stars?
That's so much to dig into.
It is remarkable how these theories have stuck around.
Yeah, and for so long.
Especially since they started popping up just a few years after it happened.
You mean after the moon landing?
Yeah, think about it. July 20th, 1969.
Neil Armstrong.
Exactly. Neil Armstrong taking those first steps on the moon.
Broadcast all over the world.
Millions and millions of people watching.
A big moment.
Huge for everyone you know. Global unity and all that.
But then
Well-
all this doubt starts to creep in.
Crazy, right?
It really is.
Makes you wonder what makes a theory like this grab hold of people.
Stick around for so long, even when there's so much evidence that we really did go to the moon.
Right. But before we get into all of that,
Yeah, let's back it up a bit.
give everyone some background.
For those who might not remember all the details about this whole moon landing thing.
Good point. We need to set the scene.
Okay, so 1969,
Right. Smack dab in the middle of the Cold War.
U.S. versus the Soviets.
Huge rivalry.
Both sides trying to be the best in space.
The moon landing. That was a huge win for the U.S.
Yeah, but it also kind of created this whole atmosphere of suspicion.
A lot of people just didn't buy it.
They couldn't believe we could actually pull it off.
Especially with the technology back then.
It's pretty interesting when you think about it.
What do you mean?
Like the fact that we landed on the moon,
Yeah.
that kind of made the conspiracy theory even stronger.
Because people were already kind of on edge.
Right. And then suddenly we do something that seems totally impossible.
Exactly.
So some people just naturally looked for another explanation.
One that made more sense to them.
Okay, but let's get to the good stuff.
You mean the evidence?
Yeah, all the evidence that conspiracy theorists always bring up,
Like that flag waving in the wind,
which there shouldn't be any wind on the moon.
right? It's supposed to be airless.
So how is that flag flapping around?
That's got to be at the top of the list of evidence, right?
I mean, we all learned that in like grade school.
No air on the moon.
So what's the deal?
It does seem like a pretty clear case when you first see it.
Mm,
The answer is actually all about how that flag was made.
NASA knew it wouldn't hang down properly without any air.
Right, because there's no air.
So they had to get a little creative.
They put it on a special pole.
Like a telescopic pole
Yeah, and it had a bar across the top,
to make it look like it was stretched out.
unfurled.
Right, and those ripples people see,
Those are just because it was folded up for the trip.
like wrinkles in clothes from your suitcase.
Exactly, same idea.
Huh.
So it's more about clever engineering.
That a big cover-up.
Makes sense, right?
I guess so, but what about those missing stars?
Oh, yeah, that one's a classic.
Space, the final frontier.
Supposed to be full of stars.
A sea of stars.
So where did they all go?
Did NASA just Photoshop them out or something?
Well, that's another one of those things that sounds really convincing.
Until
Until you think about how cameras work.
back in the 60s.
Especially back then.
You have to remember that the moon is super bright.
Really reflective.
To get a good picture of the astronauts and everything,
In all that sunlight.
they had to adjust the camera settings.
You know, prioritize the bright stuff.
Like when you take a picture on a sunny day,
And the camera focuses on the people.
not the stars in the background.
Right. The stars were definitely there.
They just weren't bright enough to show up in the photos.
Exactly. It's not that they were missing.
Just,
By the camera settings.
it's funny how we jump to conclusions.
Our brains like to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, okay, so we've got the flag and the stars.
What about those footprints?
The ones in the moon dust.
They look so perfect.
Like they were made in wet sand?
Shouldn't they be more like, just faint marks?
Like in dry sand?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
how did they stay so clear?
Well, to understand that, you need to know about lunar regolith.
Wait, what?
Regolith. It's the stuff on the surface of the moon.
Like moon dust.
Yeah, but it's not regular dust. It's super fine and powdery.
So when the astronauts stepped on it,
It compressed really easily.
like wet sand.
Exactly. And that's why their footprints look so sharp.
Okay, so once again, it's science, not a fake movie set.
The moon is a pretty weird place.
All right, let's talk about something a little more serious.
Okay, like what?
The Van Allen radiation belts.
Oh, that's wrong.
Intense radiation zones around Earth.
Not a good place to be.
And some people think there's just no way astronauts could have survived going through them.
That's a big one for the conspiracy folks, right? That sounds pretty scary.
It is a legitimate concern.
For sure, those radiation belts are dangerous.
But NASA didn't just throw astronauts into them without a plan.
So they knew about the danger.
Absolutely. They carefully planned the Apollo missions to avoid as much radiation as possible.
Like going around the worst parts?
Exactly. Plus, they made sure the spacecraft and the spacesuits were shielded.
To protect the astronauts.
Right, and they went through the belts pretty quickly, so they weren't exposed for very long.
So it was a risk, but a calculated one?
They knew the danger, but they took precautions.
Wow, so all of this so-called smoking gun evidence?
Actually has an explanation.
One that makes sense when you look at the science.
Science always wins in the end.
I guess you're right. But we've been doing a lot of debunking.
What do you mean?
Focusing on what's wrong with the conspiracy theories.
Okay.
But what about all the stuff that proves the moon landing really happened?
Oh yeah, there's a ton of that.
Like what?
Well, even the Soviets were tracking the Apollo missions.
The Soviets. Our rivals.
Yeah.
And they would have loved to call us out if they thought we were faking it.
They would have embarrassed us on the world stage.
For sure, but they never did.
So that's like international verification.
You could say that.
What else is there?
Well, what about those moon rocks?
One rock?
The Apollo missions brought back tons of them.
Literally tons.
Hundreds of pounds of lunar material.
From the moon.
And scientists all over the world have studied them.
Yeah.
They're unlike anything we have here on Earth.
You mean they're really from the moon?
Their composition, their characteristics, everything screams moon rock.
Wow, so we've got alien rocks as proof.
Pretty hard to argue with that.
I'm starting to see how much evidence there really is for the moon landing.
We've just scratched the surface.
There's more?
Oh yeah, we haven't even talked about laser reflectors.
Laser reflectors?
Or pictures from lunar orbiters.
What are those?
Special spacecraft that take pictures of the moon.
Okay, and what about all the people involved in Apollo?
Hundreds of thousands of people worked on that program. That many.
It would be impossible to keep a secret that big.
I guess you're right.
It's a mountain of evidence.
Wow, it sounds like we have our work cut out for us.
We've got a lot more to uncover.
This is getting really interesting.
I told you.
You won't believe what we find in part 2.
Stay tuned. Welcome back.
It's amazing, isn't it?
What is?
How one little topic,
You mean the moon landing?
yeah, it can bring up so much stuff.
So much evidence and debate.
It's like we're digging for treasure.
Buried treasure.
Yeah, but for the truth.
Trying to figure out what really happened.
Sifting through all these layers of claims and, counterclaims.
Trying to get to the bottom of it all.
And so far,
so far,
it seems like the moon landing
it did happen.
really did happen.
The evidence is pretty solid.
But there's one layer we haven't really talked about.
What's that?
The people.
The human element.
This wasn't just some science experiment.
No,
This was hundreds of thousands of people
real people.
putting their time and energy into this massive project.
Years of their lives.
Smart people.
Brilliant engineers, technicians, all dedicated to Apollo.
It was a huge undertaking.
Massive.
So to think that it was all a fake.
A cover-up.
Yeah, a cover-up of that size.
With that many people?
It just doesn't seem possible.
The logistics alone would be mind-boggling.
Right. And what about the astronauts themselves?
You were there.
They risked their lives to go to the moon.
Brave individuals.
They've said over and over again that it was real.
What do you think about their testimonies?
I think they're pretty powerful.
These were highly trained people.
Mentally and physically prepared for this mission.
They went through a lot.
They experienced it firsthand.
They walked on the moon. They brought back samples.
And they've never wavered in their stories.
It adds a layer of authenticity that's hard to ignore.
If it was all a hoax,
It would be a terrible thing to do to these people.
to these heroes.
Exactly. It diminishes their accomplishments.
Speaking of interesting people connected to all of this,
Who are you thinking of?
have you heard about that theory that Stanley Kubrick,
The filmmaker?
helped fake the moon landing footage?
I have heard of that one.
Something about his movie 2001,
A Space Odyssey.
right, being a test run.
Like a practice for the moon landing footage?
It's like a conspiracy theory inside a conspiracy theory.
It does sound like a movie plot.
The Kubrick theory.
It's definitely captured people's imaginations.
You have this amazing director,
Known for pushing the limits of filmmaking.
and his movie comes out right before the moon landing.
Just a year before.
It's easy to see why people would make that connection.
But when you really look at it,
There's no real evidence.
Just a lot of speculation.
It shows you how a coincidence
In timing.
can turn into this whole elaborate theory.
Our brains are wired to look for patterns.
I guess, but it also shows how important it is to separate
Separate what?
a good story from the facts.
Evidence is key.
I still don't get why these moon landing theories are still around.
You mean after all the evidence we've talked about?
Yeah, what is it about the moon landing that makes people want to believe in conspiracies?
I think it's part of a bigger trend.
What do you mean?
People are more distrustful these days of authority figures and institutions.
They don't trust the government,
Or the media.
so they look for other explanations.
For things they don't understand.
And sometimes those explanations
Lead them down the wrong path.
away from the truth.
It's not just about the moon landing.
It's about this feeling of distrust.
A lack of faith in the powers that be
And the moon landing,
became a symbol of that distrust.
something too big to be true.
Too incredible to believe.
But let's not forget about how much we all love a good story.
What do you mean?
A secret moon landing cover-up
It's way more exciting.
than just a regular science mission.
Our brains love drama.
Conspiracy theories.
They give you this feeling of knowing something others don't.
Like you're in on a secret.
Like you've cracked the code.
It's a powerful feeling.
Even if it's not based on reality.
But even if we can sort of understand why people believe these things,
There's still the question of,
why does it matter?
why does it matter if people believe the moon landing was real or not?
It happened over 50 years ago.
Ancient history, right?
So why are we still talking about it?
That's an excellent question.
And I think it goes to the heart of why critical thinking is so important.
Especially these days,
The moon landing is just one example,
of how misinformation can spread.
and make people doubt things that are true.
It's about being careful about what you believe
And checking your sources,
and questioning your own biases.
especially now with the internet.
Information spreads so fast.
It's hard to know what's real and what's not.
We need to be smart about the information we consume.
So it's not just about debunking one theory,
It's about learning to think critically,
about everything we encounter,
building a foundation of knowledge and skepticism.
to help us navigate this crazy world.
A world full of information, both good and bad.
Exactly. Makes you think, right?
It does.
I mean, if people can doubt something as big as the moon landing,
Something we all saw on TV.
what else is up for debate?
What else can we question?
It's kind of unsettling when you really think about it.
It highlights the need to be grounded in facts.
To use evidence and logic to figure things out?
We can't just dismiss everything that challenges our beliefs
Right. But we also can't just believe everything we hear.
without looking at the evidence.
This whole deep dive,
It's been a real eye-opener.
we started with this one image
That waving flag on the moon,
and ended up talking about so much more.
the science behind it all.
The history, the psychology, it's all connected.
It shows how complex this whole issue really is.
But after all that,
After all the evidence,
all signs point to
one conclusion.
we landed on the moon.
We really did.
And not just once,
6 times.
6 times. Can you believe it?
It's incredible.
Think about what that means.
A massive accomplishment.
We didn't just plant a flag and call it a day,
This was about pushing the limits.
showing what humans can do.
When we set our minds to something,
And it's been almost 55 years.
since that first step,
And we're still talking about it.
debating it, analyzing it,
The moon landing is a part of history.
a big part,
It captured our imaginations.
inspired generations to come
It showed us that anything is possible.
with enough determination.
And the impact.
It is way beyond the moon
Think about all the technology we have today.
because of the space race.
Satellites, GPS computers,
So many advancements.
all because we wanted to go to the moon.
It's a reminder that human curiosity is a powerful force.
Even when there's doubt.
We keep striving for knowledge.
We push boundaries.
We explore the unknown
It's in our nature.
to reach for the stars.
So as we wrap things up here,
I want to leave you with a question
knowing what we now know,
about the moon landing.
the evidence, the doubts, the whole story,
What does it say about how we believe things?
how do we decide what's true?
In a world full of information,
How do we separate fact from fiction?
it's a question we all need to ask ourselves.
It's not just about the moon landing.
It's about everything
It's about how we see the world.
and how we make sense of it.
It's a journey of learning,
Question,
being open to new ideas,
but also being critical.
and most importantly,
Never stop being curious.
that's what it's all about.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep searching for the truth.
That's all for this deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
What did you think of this week's episode? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to join us next time as we dive even deeper. And as always, stay curious, because you never know what discoveries are just around the corner.